We're gonna go live. All right, we are back. We're about to do a percussion clinic. We have lots of drumsticks around the room. If you have any at home, you could grab them because he's gonna be doing some things that it could be helpful to have them. This clinician is John Carroll. He taught in Odessa. When I first started teaching in Odessa, I student taught, and my 2nd through 6th years of teaching were at Nimitz, and Mr. Carroll would come down from Permian, and he would teach the percussion class 3 days a week or so, very frequently, and I would get to watch him. And then on the days he wasn't there, I would just try to not mess them up, and then he would come back again. And so I got to watch him teach percussion a lot, and he is a master. He also is a master motivator. The number of students that he has had that made All-State in high school, he would work with them from beginning band all the way through. It's incredible. He just is really great at teaching from the very beginning to the absolute highest level. So, Mr. John Carroll. Woo!
I'm going to ask, I'd like, it's not a requirement, you don't have to be here. And by the way, let me say, I'm so thankful for you to be here. I think this is a great thing that Tamari does and that WT allows to be facilitated through the band camp 2 weeks. I realize you come and, you don't have to attend all the sessions. No one's taking roles, so I'm honored that you would be here. I would like, unless you're just completely objecting to the idea, for everybody to have a pair of drumsticks. Does anybody need a pair? Okay, can we? Okay, that's fine. And then in a few minutes, I'm going to ask you to stand up, and we're going to kind of drum at the, was it you, that raised your hand? Yeah, drum at the tables. Okay, let me just give you a little bit of background. And by the way, following Dr. Garner, that's not an easy gig. So I wish I had gone first than him, but anyway. I started band in Central El Paso. That's an elementary school that's so old that it's now been shut down. In Central El Paso, just a few blocks from Fort Bliss. In 4th grade, I wanted to play trumpet. The band director said, nope, your facial structure is not good for it. I said, okay, what? He said, how about drums? And that's the way he said it, that's what we say, drums, with a plural, with an S on it. I said, okay, sounds good. So I was in 4th grade. And believe it or not the world's greatest athlete, but I did find some success at drumming and some music. I understood it. I was pretty good at arithmetic, so therefore I was pretty good at rhythm and understood about dividing beats up and how all that works and the foot tap and everything else. And for whatever reason, God just blessed me that it came fairly easy. But since it came fairly easy, that means it was pretty easy to get fairly good. But kind of like kids with grades who are pretty good at grades, sometimes they still don't make the best grades because it's so easy to them. They don't study very hard, therefore they don't quite make it over that peak. I was fortunate enough to one time make All-State band as a sophomore, All-State orchestra as a sophomore, never made it again. That's pretty painful. Had the old band composer Václav Nelibel as my conductor in Austin at Team Yay. 1968. Went off to college at ACU, decided I didn't want to be in band anymore, so I quit my freshman year, first semester. I was kind of peeved because I had tried out for the ACU orchestra, did not get first chair, and arrogant as it may seem, I thought, well, I'm just not going to do that. When I got to the first football game, when I was not a member of the band, I thought, man, I made a mistake. I'm missing out on a heck of a lot of fun stuff. So I got back in band, and the rest is history. I did not do drum corps. Honestly, I probably never even heard of it until I was 22 or so. I think I was probably good enough at that time to maybe held my own, but what those guys and girls are doing now in drum corps is just phenomenal. But I think I have figured out a few things to help people along with percussion. I would like this to be a little bit of a give and take, and if you have questions or comments or even restructuring something I'm going to say that I do say, to please just join in and do that. So I want to talk about a few basic things. I want to talk about snare drum. Obviously, when we think of percussion, we don't say the drum section. We don't say the drum section. A lot of times the public might say the drum section. We say percussion. But the bottom line is snare drum is a pretty vital component of the drum/percussion section. And generally speaking, most beginners will start in either snare drum or keyboards. And we'll talk about that here in just a few minutes. I would hope that you would give that consideration that we start both on that. Depending if you're in a small school or a large school, You may have homogeneous classes with just percussion. You may have percussion stuck in there with flutes and clarinets. And in Dalhart, Texas, USA, 90 miles northwest of here, I taught saxophones and percussion at the same time. And it's kind of a struggle at first. You can only do what you can do. You're only human. You only have so many minutes of the day, and you should try to divide things up in a proportionate manner that no one gets very shortchanged. How long your class periods? When I was in 4th grade, I met 2 times a week with my band director for about, I think, 30 minutes. Okay, again, that was a different time, different era, probably things a little bit more structured, especially if you start at the junior high level. Where I taught this past year, had 45-minute period classes, and they just go by in the blink of an eye. But you just need to figure out how you're going to do it. Homogeneous classes are, for the most part, ideally, for that 1 hour or 50 minutes, are the ideal thing. But you only have so many hours in the day. You have a high school band, you have a junior high band, you have woodwind classes, you have brass classes. So I understand that everybody has their own set of problems when it comes to teaching beginners. So I want to teach a little bit today about how I teach some beginners. After snare drum, we go to keyboards. I don't mean we do snare drum first and go to keyboards, but I mean after I mention snare drum, now I'm mentioning keyboards. The other, what I would call the trinity of big symphonic type of schools type of percussion would be timpani. But just today I'm just going to talk about snare drum and keyboards. When do we start keyboards? Do you start them with the snare drum? If you have beginning classes starting on a Tuesday, August 31st, and you don't get percussion instruments or wind instruments into the hands till a week later, so be it. But when do you have keyboards along with the snare drum? And I would respectfully hope that you do, or at least have those keyboards very, very soon after the snare drum. Plan your year in advance so you can get the basics in. Now we'll talk about basics in just a few minutes, but your basics would be a drum roll, and I'm talking about a buzz roll, or what we call a concert roll, or the real technical name for it, I guess, is multiple bounce roll. Okay, or the double stroke roll. So they're both vital. When you go, I want to talk in terms of pragmatism. When you go to if in Texas, your UIL contest, or if in another state, your assessment contest, if you're playing a piece on concert stage, honestly, whether they're doing concert rolls or double stroke rolls, if they're not playing too loud, they can probably get by either one. But in an ideal situation, you want them to be able to do both things. And I would hope that maybe I could maybe give you just 2 or 3 pointers today about that, what might help. Again, snare drum, keyboard. Let's talk about snare drum first, okay, before we go on to keyboards. Could I ask everybody to stand up? So what I'm saying to you, I totally understand. This would be true, I think, of any clinic. Different people at different points in their career or their level of knowledge about any given topic come to a clinic. So everybody said a different thing, just like the students we teach. Everybody's kind of at a different level. Everybody understands things either better or not as good as somebody else. So if I say something to you that you think's wrong and you've had success otherwise, why would you mess with success otherwise? If I say something to you that might make sense, then you might try it and see if it works. The first thing I do when I get students in a percussion class is to literally teach them how to set up the stand. So we set up the stand. That's a pretty given. I'm not going to insult you by talking about that. I do then tell them I had the claws or the hands of the top part of the music stand spread out. I said you take your drum and you lean it over like this and you simply place it on top of the 3 claws and then you tighten the bottom. So that usually takes about a day because it's a little bit clumsy. With the stands, they don't understand which wing nut to turn. But anyway, after we get all that out of the way, I then say, okay, tomorrow we get to play drums. We're not going to spend 3 more weeks figuring out how to set a drum up on a drum stand. So I had them set the trigger right in front of them, right in front of their belly button. Therefore, the snare bed is directly across. The part of the bottom head is directly where the snares are. The snares are directly across there. Therefore, when you play toward the rim, you're still on top of the snare drums. On top of the snares. First of all, we talk about our fulcrum. Our fulcrum is simply, I just tell them, it's our holding place in our hands, the fulcrum. With these Vic First sticks, which are very, very popular, you don't have them. If you got some that we brought, you don't have them. But I basically, with the Vic First sticks, I usually put it like between the T and the H. The fulcrum is the index finger first knuckle joint. First knuckle joint on the side of the stick, and the other part of the fulcrum is the thumb. So I have my index finger pointing down, I have my thumb pointing toward the bead of the stick. Okay? Now, I don't want to overanalyze this, and different students have different size hands and everything, just like embouchures and wind instruments, you know, things change a little bit. But I tell them, if you have about 1.5 to 2 inches of the butt end showing, butt end, bead, and then neck, or sometimes called the shoulder. If you have about 1.5 inches showing, you're probably in pretty good shape. With these Vic First sticks, I usually put my fingers on the T and the H in the word first. There are some sticks made now for beginners that actually have little thumbprints on the stick, and that's where you're supposed to put your stick. Put your fulcrum. I think that's pretty ideal. You know, again, it can differ from person to person, so I don't think it would be a point of making an issue of it if they feel a little bit more comfortable moving up or a little bit more comfortable moving back. Then I tell them they want to have flat hands. By the hands, I'm talking about the backs of the hands. Flat hands. So their fulcrum is like this. Gently curve or curl your other sticks, your other fingers underneath the stick. And then bring the sticks down so that the backs of your hands are facing up. Now it's easy in the midst of everything to not realize that someone has a drum way too low or way too high. I try to keep it pretty simple. I say it's about 1 inch or 2 underneath your belly button, okay, about waist level. And if it looks like that's not working for them, then we just make individual adjustments. So we want to have flat hands. We want to keep our cocoon. The cocoon is the part of the hand this is the cocoon. And that's just a term that some people use to describe your grip. So I tell them keep it as open as possible. In reality, they're going to shut it down a little bit. And in reality, that's the way I play also. But I try to keep it as open as possible. The key here is nothing more than trying to stay very, very relaxed. Try to be sure that we're not up here, but that we're down here. Okay? Try to be sure, look at me, that we don't drum like this. I've done a drum camp here this summer where a couple of people were playing like this, and you know, that's just the way they play. So they've just been allowed to, and let me tell you, we all let things go by. We all let things go by. That's not meant as a criticism. You cannot catch everything, especially if it's not a homogeneous class. You cannot catch everything. You just try your best to catch as much as you can. So flat backs and sticks down level. And then your sticks basically form a 90-degree angle. And you could take a pencil and just draw a 90-degree angle on your drum, just meeting the center. If you have a drum pad, you can take just tape, just something they can visually see, to line up the snare drum sticks to each other 90-degree angle. The way I phrase it is 90-degree angle, or at least almost a 90-degree angle. Kim?
I use the pin strapping tape that you can get like at AutoZone.
Yeah.
Because it's great because you can pull it right off afterwards.
You do it on a drum or a drum pad?
Both.
Yeah, it's ideal. It's a visual thing. Okay? I tell them if their sticks are at a 90-degree angle, well, I tell them if they had the butt end of the sticks coming out underneath the heel of the hand, then their sticks probably are at a 90-degree angle. So it's a two-step, it's a method. You can check it in 2 different ways. Bottom of the sticks, out underneath the heel of your hand, and a 90-degree angle. But a tape on it or anything on it to visually help them realize and be reminded of how those sticks should be. If you're looking at your outline, the 4 different types of snare stroke, and what we're describing now could somewhat be described as the 4 basic strokes of a mallet playing also. Now, I won't even say that so much about the timpani. It's a little bit different on timpani because sometimes the grip is a little bit different. But with 2 mallet playing, and with what I'm about to say with snare drum, there's a lot of similarity here. The first stroke is the legato stroke. Sometimes that's called the full stroke. Sometimes it's called the long stroke. Stick starts and ends at the same height. Useful for playing loud passages of music. Let me do it without that. Let's try that. So you're going to start a little bit higher. Let's do 4 per hand. Check the backs of your hands. Check to be sure you're not 10 inches above the table rather than just 2 or 3 inches above the table. Make sure your hand is moving straight up and down. Okay, let's just try it. We'll say, let's do 8 on a hand. We'll do 4 cycles worth of 8 on a hand, always the full legato stroke. Like that, okay? Let's start. I'll count you off. 1, 2, ready, go. Students do that, and I did that at the beginning of almost every class. I had them watch their sticks to be sure they're not turning their hands over. Make sure they're coming down and back up all the way. Let's do it again just a bit slower. 1 take, 2 take, ready take, go take. Presuming to teach you how to drum. My job is to maybe give you a suggestion about not how for you to drum, but how for you to suggest a student to drum. Try not to let them jam their elbows up into their body. Try not to let them have wings. Try not to just let them hang loose. I tell them there's a little bit of space there. Just try to keep that space. Try not to do this. Try not to do that. Try not to do anything that's going to fatigue your muscles. Letter B, the upstroke. Stick starts slow and ends high with a little whipping motion. Try that. Now, let me say that this is not something we would all do in one day. We might approach one stroke, stay on it for 3 or 4 days, and go to another. And again, with heterogeneous classes, it's harder to get all this stuff in. But no matter what, even if you never mention these 4 strokes, they need to stay relaxed. That's the key element in drumming. I think there's 2 things in a percussion class, or a clarinet class, or a flute class, or a tuba class, or whatever that we teach. One is how to actually play the instrument, and then the other 2 is more universal. The other one is more universal. How to read music. Okay, so I think those are 2 different compartments. You've got to teach the physical body movement, the motor work to play your instrument, and then how to read music. If you can do one, if you can read music and don't have the coordination, that's not ideal. If you have the coordination, can't read music, that's not the ideal. So of course today we're just talking about the coordination part. Look at the downstroke. Stick starts high and it stops low. Okay? Now at this point I admit to students, okay, so I've always told you to play relaxed and loose and don't grab the stick, but there is a little bit of stopping that stick. How do you stop it? I usually tell the students, what do you think, Jacob?
Control here.
Control here, and not letting it, and a little bit of finger pressure here. I tell students that the fulcrum is, these are just kind of random numbers, but the fulcrum, there's 95% of the holding, and these back 3 fingers are 5% of the holding. So 95% in the fulcrum and 5% in the back. Of course, those are just numbers. Numbers don't really mean anything except to give the impression that most of the, I don't want to say pressure, but that's what it is. In reality, most of the pressure is at the, most of the holding is at the fulcrum. And then the tap, which starts slow and ends slow. Okay, and that's just for soft passages. So generally speaking, at the beginning of the school year, they're not used to sticks in their hands. It's kind of like first graders don't write. Well, maybe they do. I don't teach first grade, but I don't think they write with little pens or pencils. I think they write with bigger pencils because they have to, and the spaces, the lines of the paper wider because their muscles are just not as coordinated. So, am I right? Okay. So, same thing. What appears easy to me with a real good student still may not be easy. So you don't overwhelm them any more than you, teach 10 fingers to a clarinet player on the second day of band or something like that. Okay? Why not? Generally speaking, high notes are loud and low notes are soft. Okay? Now, in drumming, you can also have a faster note, velocity, and that creates volume too. But for beginners And that's what I'm talking about right now. Beginners, I teach higher equals louder, lower equals softer. But lower is harder. Okay? It's not impossible, but it is hard. So therefore, I start with the full stroke. I think you can't be considered a good, I think one cannot be considered a good snare drummer if they can't do a pretty good buzz roll or concert roll or multiple bounce roll. We generally use buzz rolls in symphonic, sit-down, band, orchestra, concert type of soloing, percussion ensemble. We usually use double stroke rolls. When we use them, they'd usually be used in marching season or rudimental snare drum solo, something to that effect. Ideally, the students can learn both things, even before you show them what a roll looks like with the note and the stem, the slashes. Even before you show them what it looks like on the page, I think they ought to be able to have the motor facility to do a good drum roll. So I'm going to invite you to look at your handout, kind of while we're doing this. You can just lay one stick down for a moment. Let me suggest you put your hand, you put the bead of the stick on the center of the drum head, and I'm going to lift that stick as if there were a pin going through my thumb, as if there were a little tiny nail going through my thumb, the stick, and the first knuckle of my index finger. I'm going to lift up the stick, and I'm simply going to let it drop. Now it's going to bounce better here than it is on that table, but good drum, and if you have cheap drum pads, they don't bounce very well either, but there's some good drum pads that bounce just as well as a snare drum pair. They're just about as well. Let's do that 2 or 3 times. I don't lift up my wrist. I just lift up the stick, and I let it drop. I described to them that you want to try to hear 8 or 9 or 10 bounces in there. If you can't hear 8 or 9 or 10, and after that they get so close you really can't keep track. If you can't, I'm saying, well, maybe you're holding it too far back, or maybe you're holding it too far up. So we try to kind of use this little technique to help gauge where their fulcrum should be also. Let's do that one more time. You simply lift it up. Don't move your right hand at all. Simply lift it up and remove your left hand. Okay, then I would have them simply switch hands. Do the same thing. Have your left hand flat, lift up your stick, and let it drop. And if they do have a drum head or a drum pad that's not bouncing well, you know, Remo, different companies make some different drum pads where you can actually tune the drum pads with screwdrivers, Phillips screwdriver, or sometimes they come with these little screwdrivers. Make sure they're playing on a head that has some rebound to it. Don't let them be playing on a pillow or something like that. Make sure they have a chance to be successful at this. So after we do that a few times, I then say, okay, let's put them back in the right hand. I say, okay, just let your left hand be to your side. Now you're going to raise your wrist. So the cocoon is still partially open. You're going to raise your wrist, and you're simply going to drop the wrist and let gravity take over, like this. And at that point, if they had their fingers out, I would almost prefer that at that point, if they had their fingers out. And I'm talking about doing this like 3rd, 4th, 5th day of their, after they've at least been playing some strokes like that. And it's probably a good 2 or 3 weeks before we even open up a page of music to look at. We're just talking pure technique here, and you know, I know a lot of teachers of wind instruments hold off on that also. So I had them lift it up, get their fingers out of the way, and just let them bounce. I say if the back end of the stick hits the heel of your hand, you're going to lose those bounces. Okay, so they do that several times. Let's try that a couple times. If you're not getting 8 or 9 or 10 strokes in there, you may be doing this. You may actually be hitting a rim. You may be squeezing too tight. So I do everything in my power to make sure they understand it's all relaxation. And then I have them do the same. Yeah, Kim?
You ever, at this point, talk to them about dominant hand? And because a lot of them are like, oh yeah, I'm doing it really well with my right hand, but my left hand, you know.
I just almost don't approach that at all. I guess the answer is
you're too tight or you're too whatever with that.
Yeah, and you know, if sometimes people will play like this, and I'll say, I bet you're right-handed. They say, yeah. Well, said number one, most of the population is. I said, but number two, I can tell that because it's louder. So that's, you know, the object is to play smooth and to play even. So then after, this is stage 1 of the buzz roll. This is the preliminary to stage 1. This is the next part of stage 1. Just lift up your wrist by itself. But all we're trying to achieve is the idea and the notion that the stick bounces on its own. If you hold it too far back, it will not. If you hold it too far toward the middle, it will not. Then I go to stage 2. If you want to look at your handout for a moment on page 2. Same as stage 1, except we let the sticks bounces overlap with each other. So first of all, stage 1 would be this. This is stage 1. Complete freedom. You know, I should have said this by now. I have already demonstrated a roll. I said, this is what we want to do. I said, everybody in the world recognizes this as a drum roll, and most people cannot do a drum roll. So I said, wouldn't it be cool if in 2 weeks, if you'll do what I ask you to do, you could do a pretty good drum roll. So stage 1 is what I just said. Stage 2 is the same thing, except when we finish with right before we finish with the right hand, I then start with the left hand. Right before the left hand finishes, I then start with the right. So let me say one thing, and then let's practice now. We try not to, don't let them go. I don't stop the stick. I tell them let it die out until it ends on its own. Okay? Let's try that. So before right hand finishes, left hand starts. When right hand finishes, you pick it up and then strike it again before the left hand finishes. Okay? Let's give that a try. If I see this on some of them, I'll say, we do want to play a fast drum roll, but let's not do it yet. Hold back. Just let it happen. Don't make it happen. Let it happen. Okay. And sometimes you'll see, sometimes kids will lift up a stick like this. They basically lift it up with their fingers rather than their wrist. Okay, make sure they're lifting up with their wrist. Finger control does come in handy as the drumming goes along, but I think right now they need to be on wrist control. Then we go to stage 3. Stage 3 is the speed up process. I said, okay, so technically you're doing a drum roll right now. I said, but it's so slow it doesn't sound like a drum roll. I say, what has to happen for that process to sound like a drum roll? Well, the answer is the notes have to get closer together. You still, every time you strike the drum head with a stick, you still hope you get multiple strokes, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, but the bounces have to become a little bit closer together. So I said, okay, so the solution now, the problem now is to figure out how do we get those bounces close together? How do we get the bounces so that they sound like a zzz, just like a buzz, not like a brrr. We don't want to hear individual notes within the roll. All right, I have developed something just kind of over time that I just call the spool method. I don't think it's any different than anybody else teaches. I just kind of put a little acronym to it. Look at letter A, with number 3, the spool method. A, when first speeding the roll up, this is a preliminary, the student must be sure that the middle finger comes in contact with the stick. So if they're doing this, once they decide that the roll needs to go faster, their middle finger comes in contact with the stick. Okay? If it's not there yet, it needs to come in contact with the stick. And then S for spool. You squeeze the stick. You squeeze slightly with the middle finger on the underneath side of the stick. Let's give that a try. Okay? So right now, I'm going to lift it up and do it stage 1 style. But now I'm going to go stage 3, where the middle finger puts a little bit of pressure. I don't like to use the word pressure, but in reality, it is a little bit of pressure. So I lift the stick up and I tell them, and it's got to always be slight, because all it takes is overdoing it, and you're that. I said, that's what you want. So everything's got to be slight. Then I talk about P in the word spool. I talk about P. P means to put a little bit of pressure on the fulcrum, except I'm thinking it means pinch. Pinch just a little bit at the fulcrum. Just a little bit. Everything done in moderation. Everything done in just slight increments. So first of all is the S, a little bit of squeeze with the middle finger. Second of all is the pinch at the fulcrum. So here's stage 1, go back to stage 1. Now, here's stage 2. Excuse me, stage 2 is just where they overlap. Stage 3, where there's a pinch there and a squeeze there. Or if you want to go in spelling order, squeeze with the middle finger, pinch with the fulcrum. Through my years, I've heard so many drummers, including people I've taught. This is not pointed at somebody else, including people I started as beginners, who could read rhythms pretty well and play single strokes pretty well, but still could not do rolls very good. Either double stroke or especially concert rolls. I start with concert roll. I think it's harder. I'd kind of like to get it out there and get it kind of out of the way off my agenda before we go to other stuff. But I do think it's a little bit harder, but we hear so many people who could play good rhythms, but when they come to rolls, they can't do a good roll. I tell those kids, let the sticks float on top of your drum head. You're just after a pure computer sound. Da, just pure sound without any bumps or strikes or strokes or any kind of thing in there you perceive as anything other than a squeeze. So then the OO in spool stands for oomph. Okay, just a little bit of energy. I looked up oomph the other night just to make sure it didn't mean anything bad, because I've been saying it for years. And it doesn't, I'm safe. So squeeze with the middle finger, pinch at the fulcrum, and then give just a little bit more oomph. And by that I mean a little bit more energy, a little bit more velocity. So here's the squeeze and pinch, and then here's the oomph. But again, they can easily overdo it. So that's not what they want. Let's give it a try, okay? Just try that a few times with your hands. Let it more oomph. If they've evolved into this, the sticks are no longer overlapping, so therefore it's going to be a disjointed roll. It's not going to be a roll. So I say, don't wait. Number one, you're putting probably a little too much pressure. You're getting this bounces over with too quickly, too soon. And second of all, you're not getting your second hand of this. Be sure they're always overlapping. And then the L stands for lower. Let the sticks be lower. So stage 1 was back here. L means as you get a little bit faster, keep the sticks a little bit lower. So here's squeeze and pinch. Squeeze and pinch are kind of like one combined step. A little bit of squeeze here, a little bit of pinch there. Oomph, a little bit more energy on the drum head. But don't stop the stick. You want to make sure they're never stopping the stick. The way the stick stops is it's on its own. And then you keep the sticks lower, okay? So I'm going to go from stage 1 to stage 3. Now again, this is not in a one-day thing. This is like a week, 6-day thing. Stage 1 to stage 3. No overlapping yet. Now I'm going to start letting them overlap, but that's all I'm going to do different. Now as I go into stage 3, I'm going to make sure that middle finger is in contact with the stick. And I'm putting a little bit of squeeze with the middle finger. Pressure or pinch with the fulcrum, a little bit more oomph, and keeping our sticks lower. And if they can even do that at the end of 2 weeks, I praise them up and down, because if they can do that, that's great, as long as they're staying relaxed. Nothing more important than staying relaxed. Why don't we give it a try? Stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. I call them 4 strokes of stage 1, where we do right hand, left hand, right hand, left hand. 4 strokes of stage 2, where we do right, left, where they are allowed to overlap. And then I say, okay, gradually bring your middle finger in contact, squeeze, pinch, a little bit more oomph, keep sticks lower. And at that point I say, and don't try to stay with anybody else. If somebody else is going faster than you, it's not a contest for fastness, it's a contest for smoothness. So let's give it a try. Stage 1. Overlapping. Now, a little bit of squeeze, a little bit of pinch, a little bit more oomph. Yeah, and some people you hear pretty good, and then they can't resist the temptation to go from here to here. I say, okay, we got to take a step backwards because that's not the object. The object, we don't get any points for playing fast. We don't get points for playing it smoothly. So, if that might help you at any point in time, please feel free to look at it. As the roll progresses, if you want to sit down for a moment. As the roll progresses, the idea is to keep the roll as relaxed of a sound as possible. You see that I said that they want to play it fast. In their mind, it sounds fast. And I tell them, I can make it sound fast if you'll just not move your wrists so fast. All you're after is a smooth roll. I will often use this technique. Then I'll lift my sticks up off the drum, and I say, see, my sticks are not doing this. My sticks are doing this. How does it sound fast? Because I'm allowing each stick to have about 8 or 9 or 10 notes before I go to the other hand. Another imagery I use is let the beads of the stick float on top of the drum head. No downward pressure. I use the image of a lily pad sitting on the surface of a lake. No downward pressure. A lily pad, I guess, will sit there forever until something sits on top of it and weighs it down. So make sure the roll sounds like it's floating on top of the head. No downward pressure. Keep your hands flat, keep the sticks flat, and don't let it go off into something you don't want. So the thing I always go back to, and I always ask the students, what do I preach on mostly about the drum roll? And they say, hopefully, they say, playing it smooth. Not playing it fast, but playing it smooth. And then I start thinking, okay, now eventually they're going to have to be able to read it in music. So what's a very, very common thing we might see with the drum roll? It would be a quarter note roll tied to a quarter note. And everybody in here knows, but the students don't know. So I say, here's what it looks like on music. Here's the head of the note, here's the stem, and then these 3 slashes to the stem of the note indicate that it's a roll. Even though it's just one note typed there on the page, it's actually a roll, so it's actually many notes. So I say, okay, many times we're going to divide a beat into 4 notes. So we're talking about 16th notes, but they don't know 16th notes. We haven't even opened up the book yet. They don't know quarter notes, let alone 16th notes. I say, let's try to do 5 notes. Okay, why don't we all try that? 5 notes, 5 easy notes. And I don't overemphasize legato stroke, downstroke. I emphasize relaxed stroke. So I ask them to do this. Let's try it. Ready, go. Ready, go. Ready, go. And then I said, okay, now we're going to try to buzz that, except for the last note. And if they buzz the last note, fine. I said, the idea is not to play the last note if you can help it. Okay, let's try that. 1, 2, ready, go. Ready, go. Ready, go. Ready, go. Yeah, now if you're not a percussionist, and I know most of you know the answer to this, what is it called, if you're a percussionist, don't answer, what is it called when we use the single strokes as the basis for the roll?
Skeleton?
The skeleton, or primary strokes, right. And I try to make sure they understand it. When we do get 16th notes, I say often 16th notes of the skeleton, not always. Usually it has to do with how fast the music's going. But I do say that's pretty common. But I say don't even worry about that. All you need to worry about is 5 even strokes, okay? And then I'll do this. I'll play that, then they'll play it, then I'll play the roll, then they play the roll. Let's try that. So I do, you do. Here we go. Sometimes you'll see kids do this, and then they'll do this. And I said, no, just go back to just doing the single strokes of all. I said, don't worry about the roll yet. It'll come to you, okay? Just make sure that I tell them, don't let it speed up. Just make the sticks stay the same speed all the time. And I know most of you know this. These are just little reminders and things that I have found success with. I do believe it's real important to get this in pretty early. When I first started teaching, I probably didn't talk about a roll till February or March. Well, that's too late. I just think it's important. I think it's pretty easy if they'll stay relaxed. And I think it's kind of something cool for them to do that they can do and show people that they can do a roll. And then number 4 there underneath the E. So after a while, I'll have the students start with what we were just doing, but just don't stop. So I'll say, okay, instead of this, you're going to do this. So instead of this, you're going to do this. Okay, so I just say that's how you do it. Then I'll say, okay, now we got to be able to start it without thinking this. We just got to be able to start it cold turkey. Just not getting into it, not this, but just that. Okay? All right, so I encourage you to put emphasis on the buzz roll before too long. It is harder in heterogeneous classes. I totally get it. But even if they come to Christmas music and all they have on Christmas music is quarter rest, quarter note, quarter rest, quarter note, you could add in a few things with pencil, with computer, that they could play some rolls with. Okay, so I think it's really important that they develop that pretty on. Letter F, make certain that the back fingers are always in contact with the stick. Fingers should not come off the stick. If possible, this should be a daily, yes, John?
In terms of the pacing of the year, that's like early on in the year that you're teaching the roll?
To me, it's like the first week even, or at least within the first week that they have their instrument.
Okay.
Yeah, and they don't have to know what it looks like. They don't have to know a quarter note from anything else. They just, I think that's important. Yes?
We have about
Good.
10 minutes.
Okay, let's move on then. Let's move on quickly. I think you need to check that every day, even in heterogeneous classes. I did that when I was teaching snare and sax. We just say, let me hear a buzz roll. And after about 3 seconds, I go to the next person. I'll either say smooth or try to smooth it out. Keep your hands lower. Okay? All right, let's talk about the double stroke roll. Roman numeral 5 down there. Go back to stage 1 of the buzz roll. So I'll have them do this again. And then I'll say, okay, do it again, and stop the stick after 2 notes. And I don't tell them how to stop it. I think a lot of people intuitively squeeze a little bit here. I think a lot of people intuitively let it hit the back of their hand. I feel like that's what I do. Just let it hit the back of my hand. But I don't overanalyze that. I don't say anything about it unless they ask me. I say, okay, now do several of those. Let's try that, okay? So if it's stage 1 pressure, which is no pressure, it would be like this. Let's try stage 1 pressure. And then I'll say, okay, try with your left hand. Let's try with your left hand. Okay. All right. Then we just go from there. Okay. Then I say, now you need those 2 notes closer together. You don't want a snare drum roll that sounds like this. I said, you want one that sounds like this. I said, so how do we get those 2 notes close together? The answer is the same. A little bit of squeeze with the middle finger, a little bit of pinch at the fulcrum, a little bit more oomph, and I then say the stick usually can come up a little bit higher. But if we go too slow on the primary strokes for a skeleton, for a rudimental roll, then it's harder to do a double stroke roll. And they end up muscling it. So you don't want them to muscle it. You eventually want them to, where it's strike the drum and it bounces once. So let's do some fast primary strokes like this. 1, 2, ready, go. Same thing with the roll. With the roll. Single strokes. Single strokes. With the roll. Okay? And I emphasize to them, if I hear even 1 3 there, then it has stopped being a double stroke roll and evolved into being buzz roll. Okay? So these are some things that I think are important. Let's move on to the next page. We're running out of time. I think they really need to learn 2 more things at the beginning of the year. Flams. I try not to make this too big of a deal. I say let both sticks hit the rest of the drum head. Now pull them off an inch. Now raise your right stick at your wrist, not your arm, and let gravity take over. Let gravity pull the sticks down. I say, which one's going to hit the drum first? Well, obviously the one that's closest is going to hit first. I say, great. And then just follow through with it. Okay? And I have found that if I overanalyze it, then it gets worse. If I just kind of make it like it's no big deal, then it's a little bit better. And there's 2 ways to do flams. Alternating or not alternating. A lot of times in rudimental music and harder marching music, you'll see things of that nature where there's not so much alternation. And then the drag, okay? I just tell them it's like a big flam. I say, if you can do a double stroke roll, all this is a 3-stroke roll. And then I make sure they understand. Now, sometimes buzz drags are allowed. By the way, just in case you don't realize it, just in case you don't realize it, a drag and a rough, same thing. So you can have buzz. And it would be another topic to discuss, when do you use those, because there's different opinions on those. But you need to be able to do, not you, but the student of yours needs to be able to do both of them pretty well, and at times would have different ways to, different times to use them. Bells. So I've spent 45 minutes talking about snare, so that looks like I think it's that much more important than the 5 minutes I'm going to talk about bells. If we're not careful, that's the way it's going to be in a classroom situation, and I do not think that at all. Within the first 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 days of snare, I try to get a little bit of keyboard in. First of all, if you have beginning classes, with percussion, you might very well consider having them buy those little bell sets. They're a little more than toys, but they're better than nothing. Okay, you would never use them in a concert setting, what I'm talking about. Most of them have names of the notes engraved on them. Take the tedious time to get a piece of white medicinal tape or white duct tape and tape over those names. And that's a little bit tedious. It takes a while to do it, but please do that. And of course, please don't let them write their names above the notes. You don't let wind players do that. I have watched percussion. I'll say, hand them a piece of music. And then they start writing the names up without looking on some other reference to see what they are. So they already know what they are. But they do it anyway. And I just say, you're making more work for yourself. You didn't have to look up that note to know it's a C. Why did you write a C in? So don't let them get in that habit. 2 mallet playing, very much like snare drumming. Of course, you're moving around more laterally. 4 mallet playing, completely different animal. If you have homogeneous classes in a big school setting, and you only have to teach those percussionists, and they're real sharp, you might get to 4 mallets before the end of the year. Sometimes I get pretty down because I don't get everything done I want to get done, but I try to show myself some grace. I went to a clinic at Team Aegis this past year with my good friend Ken Wiley doing the clinic, and he said, he says you just can't get everything in. Snare drum, keyboards, even though they're both percussion instruments, they are still 2 different instruments. I think for people who say they're not the same instrument, I don't think that's realistic. They're 2 different instruments. There are some similarities, but they're played differently. So, but I do think they need to have a basic foundation for the bells as well as the snare drum. And on top of that, they can play little songs on the bells. When you're assigning parts for a winter concert, and I hope by then you would have some bells, assign bell parts. When you're assigning parts for spring concert, assign bell parts. Make sure everybody's playing some keyboards as well as snare. Are there any questions? John?
What are your thoughts on drumline in junior high?
I have actually done that before. And there's one marching band in the state of Texas that has junior high marching band. That's where I taught this past year. I think for a kid to go from and people used to do it all the time. And Dr. Garner's talking about it up here. And in my first year to teach, I did it all the time. But I still think it's a huge task to go from beginning band, snare drum, or beginning band clarinet for that matter, to second year trying to put it all together marching band. You can't discount the PR part of it and the fun part of it and the pep rally fun part of it, and it makes the band look cool. You can't discount that. But as far as just pure pedagogical, I think it has its drawbacks. That's my opinion.
So stay right there. So what we're going to do is the director's band people have got to leave. If you want to just leave your sticks where they are, we'll pick them up. If you are not in director's band, you can stay and ask a few more questions maybe, and there are a couple online questions. So if y'all can leave quietly, we'll keep going.
Okay.
I have an online question. Through the whole roll, stages 1 through 3, should the stick ever come in contact with the heel of the hand?
I think when you're drumming, when you're getting faster, if the stick hits the heel of your hand, that's not the end of the world.
It's what?
It's all right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the other online is there a place that I can look for percussion percussion notation in the music? I have seen rolls that are notated very differently, and this is often what confuses my students.
Usually rolls are notated with either 2 slashes or 3 slashes above the stem. Sometimes older music will have TR, meaning trill, which means snare drum roll, if it's snare drum music. You know, sometimes you see music that is in diamond shapes or X's. That usually refers to triangle or tambourine or
I think it's mainly rolls. I've seen some pictures on Facebook of weird stuff. Is there any kind
Sometimes
of a
you'll see a
website?
Z in a
Okay.
stem, and the Z means buzz roll.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there's no like website or book that you know of that would
Oh, I'm
not-
sure there is, but I don't know
Okay.
what it is.
And then, what size snare sticks are best for beginners? Oh, well, when he's done, we're gonna clap really loud to make up for all the other people. I didn't let clap, sorry. Okay, what size drumsticks for beginners?
Well, I think the Vic Firth SD1 General is a pretty good size. I don't get any credit for saying that, but I think it's a pretty good size. It's a moderate size. You know, too big, but I think a little bit too big would be better than a little bit too small, because I just don't think they're coordinated enough yet to have smaller things in their hands.
Okay. Any questions from you guys? Okay, let's give him a thunderous round of applause.